one thing we Australians cannot stomach, it is being played for fools.
Even the Australians came out and accused Meghan Markle and Prince Harry of using the Australians as an ATM machine.
By the time Meghan reached Bondi Beach in Sydney, the problem the Queen would later confront at Sandringham was already on display. Royal duty was starting to look like personal branding. What should have been a moment of service began to feel carefully managed. Grief, cameras, compassion, and image all folded into the same public scene. And that is exactly why the Queen's line mattered. Because if the crown is meant to represent service, then using that same platform to build a personal product was never going to be acceptable. Australia did not create that concern, it revealed it. What looked, on the surface, like compassion and public duty began to feel like something else entirely.
But Meghan and Harry, they apparently met with survivors of the Bondi Beach shooting, which I do give them some kudos for, but it just felt opportunistic because apparently Meghan Markle was selling that outfit as well.
A carefully staged moment where grief, cameras, and personal image all occupied the same space. By the final day in Sydney, at Bondi Beach, the tension was impossible to ignore. This was not just another public appearance. It was the kind of moment that explains why the Queen later drew such a hard line at Sandringham. You cannot serve the crown while also turning that service into a brand. The final day of the Australia tour didn't just close a chapter, it cracked something open. And that's saying something because this tour had already been a masterclass in controversy from the moment it began. But Sydney's Bondi Beach is where the mask slipped completely, and where the true purpose of the entire exercise became impossible to ignore. Bondi Beach is not just a tourist landmark. It carries the weight of a serious 2024 tragedy at a nearby shopping center. Real grief, real survivors, real families still processing what they lost. Meghan showed up. The cameras rolled. The expression was appropriately solemn. To the untrained eye, it looked like genuine compassion in action. Then, within hours, the outfit she wore during that visit was listed for sale on an AI-powered retail platform she is reportedly connected to.
Even visits to serious places, sick children, shelters, victims, somehow all turned into a curated shopping list. And please, spare me the, "oh, she wasn't paid for any of this" narrative. You think anyone's flying across the world, doing appearances, smiling for cameras for free? Especially Meghan Markle. Let's be serious.
Hours, not days. Hours. Writer Tom Sykes said exactly what the rest of us were thinking. That Meghan had effectively converted a tragedy-linked location into a commercial backdrop. That she had walked into a space of raw human suffering and walked out with content. And Sykes didn't dress it up. He argued that monetizing the optics of such a moment doesn't just cross a professional line. It crosses a basic human one. The visit is not the problem. The tragedy was real. The survivors are real. The grief of those families is not a prop. What is being indicted here is what happened immediately after, and what that timing reveals about what the visit was actually for. Because here is the truth that no amount of careful framing can erase. People who show up somewhere out of genuine solidarity do not pivot directly into retail promotion. That is not how grief works. That is not how service works. When compassion and commerce share the same afternoon, one of them is performing. And we all watched the performance. That became the defining image of the final day. Not the tears, not the hugs, not the carefully framed photographs. The defining image was the checkout button that appeared before the day was even over. This isn't a new tension. Queen Elizabeth II reportedly drew a hard line at the Sandringham Summit years ago. Service and profit cannot occupy the same space. Not because of bureaucratic protocol, because mixing them corrodes the meaning of both.
$10 million from this trip, would you believe? According to expert Ted Jenkin, this is extraordinary, Meghan and Harry could make more money from audience, aggregation, premium access, brand leverage. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex could earn $2 million from speaking engagements and appearances, $3.5 million from sponsorships and brand deals, and $4.5 million from media and content value.
When a charitable engagement doubles as a brand activation, the people at the center of that engagement stop being the point. They become the scenery, and the individual doing the visiting becomes the product. That principle wasn't abstract. It was a warning. And this tour proved, beat by beat, why the warning was necessary. Because Bondi Beach wasn't an isolated incident. Earlier in the tour, an outfit worn during a hospital visit with sick children was listed for sale shortly after. The same pattern followed a visit connected to veterans. By the time the Bondi Beach moment landed, nobody was calling it a coincidence anymore. They were calling it a system, a methodology, a repeatable formula where access to suffering is converted into commercial visibility with near-mechanical consistency. And yet, behind palace walls, according to insiders, the response has been to do nothing. No title discussions, no formal repositioning, no signal of concern. The institutional strategy appears to be absorption. Take the damage, keep moving, let the public's attention cycle forward. Sources suggest the palace believes public opinion calcified a long time ago, and that engaging with the controversy only amplifies it. One insider, described as someone once close to Queen Elizabeth II, was blunter than any official statement would dare to be. This is exactly what she tried to prevent. Read that again. The person who built the modern institution's credibility apparently saw this coming and tried to stop it. And the institution she left behind is now tolerating the precise outcome she worked to prevent. That is not a minor observation. That is an indictment of every decision made since Sandringham. The line the Queen drew has not just blurred during this tour. According to those watching most closely, it has been erased entirely. And the choice not to respond to that erasure is itself a response. Silence at this level is policy. And that policy will have consequences that extend far beyond this tour, this moment, and this controversy. And then there was the Her Best Life retreat, which managed to compress every problem with this tour into a single ticketed event. This was sold as a premium, exclusive experience. Meghan's name was the selling point. Her presence was the product. Attendees paid accordingly. What they received was approximately 2 hours before Meghan departed for a rugby match with Harry. 2 hours. For an event that had been marketed as something transformative, something worth the price of admission, 2 hours is not a retreat. It is an appearance. And there is a significant difference between those two things. One that the people who paid for it understood immediately. The sold-out narrative around the event did not survive contact with reality. Reports confirmed that availability remained visible in the days leading up to the retreat, with last-minute promotional pushes still trying to move tickets. When the gap between what was claimed and what was verifiable becomes that wide, skepticism doesn't just grow, it calcifies. And that calcified skepticism followed them directly into their next public moment. At the New South Wales rugby match, Harry and Meghan appeared on the big screen. What happened next tells you everything about where this tour actually landed. There was no roar, no wave of recognition, no electricity in that stadium when their faces appeared. The crowd had come for rugby. They stayed for rugby. Harry and Meghan were a momentary distraction, processed and forgotten before the next play began. Compare that to the genuine enthusiasm that surrounded their earliest public appearances, and the contrast is not subtle. The floor has dropped, and no amount of carefully timed imagery changes that. Because the imagery is timed, and observers who have watched this operation long enough recognize the pattern immediately. The kiss, the embrace, the hand-holding photographed at precisely the moment the retreat backlash was reaching peak volume. These are not candid moments accidentally caught by a nearby lens. These are managed releases, and they serve a clear function. Flood the frame with warmth so that the questions get crowded out. Outfit listings, Bondi Beach controversy, retreat attendance gaps. All of it briefly disappears when the affection content drops. That is not coincidence. That is strategy. And then there were the children. At hospital visits and public walkabouts, Meghan's interactions with young children became a subject of scrutiny that no one on her team appeared to anticipate. One former teacher, reviewing footage, identified a specific and telling behavior pattern: breaking eye contact and signaling closure while a child was still actively engaged, still reaching, still mid-interaction. That is not warmth. That is management. The interaction had served its photographic purpose, and so it was concluded, regardless of what the child needed in that moment. The contrast with Catherine, Princess of Wales, is not manufactured criticism. It is observable reality. Catherine gets low. She meets children at their level, physically and emotionally. She responds to what they actually say, rather than steering toward the camera angle. The children lean into her because something in those interactions is genuinely mutual. You cannot manufacture that on a walkabout. You cannot schedule it. It either exists or it doesn't. And the camera, with brutal impartiality, shows you which is which every single time. What makes this even harder to ignore is that names are now entering the conversation. Boris Johnson has been floated in speculation about figures who might support some form of reintegration for Harry and Meghan. Whether that idea carries real weight or exists only at the level of rumor is still an open question. But the fact that the conversation is happening at all tells you something profound about how far the situation has evolved. This is no longer a story about one tour, one trip, one set of hospital appearances. This has become a negotiation, or at least the early tremors of one, about what the Sussex operation is allowed to be going forward. And that brings us to the control problem, which may be the most dangerous dimension of all of this. Right now, the Sussex brand is moving through Commonwealth countries without institutional oversight. Harry and Meghan are blending paid appearances with charitable causes, performing something that looks structurally identical to a royal tour without any of the accountability that a royal tour carries. Some insiders are now saying the quiet part out loud. If this half-in, half-out model is already the reality on the ground, then maybe the question is no longer whether it exists, but whether it can be managed. Because a loosely structured return with guardrails might be easier to contain than an entirely independent operation with no limits, no rules, and no one at the institution with the authority to say stop. That framing, sometimes described as a quiet operational thaw, may be coordinated. It may simply be different voices arriving at the same uncomfortable conclusion independently. What is not ambiguous is what the tour demonstrated in practice. Every appearance went ahead. The hospital visits happened. The memorial moments happened. The walkabouts happened. And the commercial activity that followed happened too. And through all of it, there was no visible institutional intervention. No statement. No pushback. Nothing. And you need to understand what that silence communicates, because silence at the institutional level is not neutrality. It is permission granted through inaction. And permission granted once becomes the foundation for everything that follows. The crowd response at the rugby match underscored something colder than any statement ever could. No backlash. No outrage. Just nothing. A brief look, a moment of recognition, and then people moved on. That is not forgiveness. That is not welcome. That is the particular silence of a public that has already made its judgment and simply no longer finds the subject worth their energy. This is precisely the outcome Queen Elizabeth worked to prevent. At Sandringham, her position was unambiguous. Service and commerce cannot occupy the same space. That line was not drawn arbitrarily. It was drawn because once it disappears, the entire meaning of public service collapses into performance. And William, described by those close to him as watching all of this and finding it extremely dangerous for the monarchy, understands that what his grandmother protected cannot be quietly dismantled through inaction and then easily recovered. The current approach may be passive, but passivity has a shelf life, and when the patience runs out, the response will not be quiet at all. And here is where the story stops being theoretical. Because the public record is already doing the work the palace hasn't yet, and the evidence it's assembled is damning enough on its own. By the time the Australian tour wound down, the picture had been painted in full. The appearance at the retreat was short, performatively short. The kind of brief that gets you credit without requiring commitment. And while that fleeting presence was still being processed by the public, the clothing listings were already live. Products tied to the aesthetic of the visit, cataloged and available. The merchandise machine didn't pause for reflection. It doesn't know how. And the public noticed. Not with outrage exactly, but with something arguably more dangerous. Quiet recognition. That muted reaction wasn't indifference. It was exhaustion from an audience that has seen this playbook run too many times to be surprised by it anymore. But nothing crystallized the moment quite like what happened at Bondi Beach. Meghan's visible emotional response there didn't land the way it was presumably intended. Instead of generating the wave of sympathy that once came so automatically, it generated debate. Analysts dissected it. Media commentators asked questions. Viewers ran the footage back. The central question, whether what they were watching was genuine or constructed, became the entire conversation. And that debate, that shift from instinct to analysis, represents something the couple cannot buy back. You don't get to manufacture trust after you've spent years making people suspicious of your sincerity. The audience has been trained, by Meghan and Harry themselves, to look for the seams. Now they see them everywhere. This didn't materialize from nowhere. Patterns don't. They build. The Uvalde visit is the example critics return to again and again, and for good reason. After the Robb Elementary School shooting, Meghan arrived. Quietly, supposedly without advance notice. She was photographed placing flowers. She appeared emotional. The images traveled instantly across every major platform. At first pass, it read as private grief made public only by proximity. But questions followed within hours. Was the media presence actually coincidental? Was the timing of the images too clean, too composed for something truly spontaneous? Did the focus belong to the families or to the woman standing among them? Those questions were never answered. They were just absorbed into the growing file. Now set that beside Bondi Beach, and the pattern critics describe becomes impossible to dismiss. Visible emotion in a charged location, followed closely by commercial activity tethered to that same moment. Even if the feelings are authentic, and that is a larger concession than this couple has earned, the decision to monetize the atmosphere surrounding them remains a choice. A deliberate one. Grief does not require a product drop. Most people understand that without being told. The Jordan visit adds yet another layer. During that trip, photographs documented meetings with representatives connected to organizations that had circulated deeply controversial political content. Those details were reported. No response came. And then, in the days that followed, came the emotionally staged appearance at a separate memorial site. Visible anguish, careful framing, maximum impact. The contrast was not lost on those paying attention. Critics asked the question no sympathetic outlet would. What exactly is the connective tissue here? What principle governs which tragedies receive private solidarity and which ones receive the full visual treatment? Because from the outside, the answer increasingly appears to be whatever serves the narrative that week. Media coverage became its own indictment. Outlets with close access delivered glowing assessments that bore little resemblance to what neutral observers were reporting on the ground. One correspondent's insistence that the heavy police presence was entirely routine, despite footage and eyewitness accounts suggesting something far more complex, became a flashpoint. It drew attention not because the claim was outrageous on its own, but because it fit a pattern of coverage that has consistently softened what should be hard edges. Journalist Emily Andrews noted that this dynamic isn't new. She pointed to 2018 as the moment the template was established. Relentlessly positive coverage deployed, even as reporters on the inside quietly acknowledged the contradictions they were choosing not to print. That is the real story inside the story. It is not just what Meghan and Harry do. It is how the machinery around them has been calibrated to obscure it, and how, despite that machinery, the truth keeps finding its way through anyway. The question of what happens next is the one Meghan and Harry cannot afford to answer honestly. a potential return to the United Kingdom would not be a homecoming. It would be a reckoning. Because whatever softness still exists in British public opinion toward Harry is not loyalty. It is nostalgia. It is the fading echo of who he used to be before the interviews, before the book, before the systematic dismantling of every institution that shaped him. And nostalgia is not a foundation. It is a countdown. Some observers have noted that a degree of residual goodwill toward Harry still exists in Britain. What they are not saying loudly enough is that this goodwill is eroding in real time, with every new venture, every new grievance, every new appearance calibrated to generate revenue. It is softer than it was. Less certain. More conditional. And that conditionality changes everything, because it means that for the first time, favorable headlines alone cannot manufacture the reception they need. Trust has to already be there. And trust, once spent, does not refill itself. Australia was one thing. Australians encountered a version of Meghan and Harry filtered through a single 2018 tour, and then measured against whatever this new iteration was supposed to represent. That is a shallow pool of history to draw from. Britain is something else entirely. The British public watched Harry grow up. They watched him at his mother's funeral. They watched his military service, his genuine connection to the Invictus Games, the version of him that felt unscripted and real. That history is not an advantage for Harry anymore. It is the measuring stick by which every subsequent choice gets judged. And the distance between who he was and what he has become is precisely where opinion fractures most sharply. Some people still reach for the old version. Others have accepted that the old version is gone. And that split does not heal. It deepens. Prince William's circle did not use the phrase, "extremely dangerous for the monarchy," carelessly. Those words were chosen because the stakes are that specific and that serious. This is not about aesthetics or optics or whether a particular tour generated good press. This is about the functional integrity of the institution itself. The monarchy's entire value proposition, its ability to drive tourism, project soft power, inspire charitable engagement, maintain genuine public trust, rests on one foundational belief: that when a member of the royal family appears somewhere, it is because duty called them there, not a commercial contract. The moment that belief becomes uncertain, the foundation does not collapse dramatically. It erodes quietly. And that quiet erosion is exactly what has been happening, layered event by event, appearance by appearance, each one blurring the line a little further between public service and personal brand building. King Charles has chosen caution over confrontation, and on a purely human level, the instinct is understandable. Public conflict produces media cycles, and media cycles produce more Harry and Meghan content flooding the conversation. But caution is not neutrality. Caution, in this context, is permission. The titles remain. The positions remain. The Sussex brand continues operating inside a credibility structure that still traces directly back to the crown. And that connection does not weaken just because no one is actively defending it. It persists. It compounds. It keeps lending weight to every commercial move they make. Queen Elizabeth II spent decades ensuring that line never blurred. Not because it was easy, but because she understood that the line was the role. Without it, everything else becomes negotiable. And once everything is negotiable, nothing is protected. That protection was never something Harry and Meghan stumbled into losing accidentally. That is the part that demands to be said plainly, without hesitation, without the usual diplomatic cushioning that lets them off the hook. Every choice that led here, every blurred line, every commercial attachment dressed up as public service was made deliberately, with full awareness of what they were doing and full knowledge of what had been agreed at Sandringham. The summit was not a suggestion. It was a boundary drawn by the most experienced institutional guardian the monarchy had seen in generations. And they looked at that boundary and decided it applied to everyone except them. The Sandringham Agreement did not exist in a vacuum. It came directly from a recognition that the royal institution's symbolic power is not renewable on demand. It is finite, It is fragile, and it is entirely dependent on the perception that it exists outside commercial interest. That was not an abstract principle being debated in a boardroom. That was the lived understanding of an institution that had survived wars, abdications, and public scandals by holding one line above everything else. Service must never become a transaction. The moment it does, it stops being service. It becomes a product. And products depreciate. What we are watching now is that depreciation in real time. You can see it in the strained partnerships. You can see it in the adjusted pricing. You can see it in the way invitations to certain events no longer carry the urgency they once did. These are not coincidences. They are the market correcting itself in response to a signal that has been sent repeatedly. That Sussex-branded appearances exist within a commercial ecosystem and therefore must be evaluated as commercial assets rather than acts of genuine public commitment. That is the shift Meghan and Harry triggered. And they triggered it knowingly. The Australia tour did not reset that dynamic. The Bondi Beach footage, the stadium appearances, the carefully framed stadium crowd, the retreat cameo, the "I'd love to come back" statement delivered on cue. None of it landed as genuine reconnection because none of it could. The commercial infrastructure surrounding it was already visible. The product listings, the business positioning, the retreat pricing, all of it existed in direct proximity to moments that were being presented as heartfelt and selfless. The public is not naive. When the same people who just walked through a children's ward are simultaneously managing a brand portfolio, observers stop asking whether the visit was sincere and start asking what it was worth to them. That is the most unforgivable damage Meghan and Harry have inflicted, not just on their own reputation, but on every genuine moment of royal service that now gets filtered through a new lens of suspicion. A hospital visit no longer stands alone. A memorial appearance no longer reads as pure. A community engagement no longer carries uncomplicated meaning. Every future appearance by any Sussex-adjacent figure now arrives preloaded with a question mark that Meghan and Harry placed there themselves. They did not inherit this problem. They manufactured it. The institution has absorbed the cost quietly. It has continued lending symbolic weight to appearances that are then folded into commercial cycles, and it has done so without the clear public enforcement that would force an honest reckoning. That restraint is not generosity. It is a structural vulnerability that Meghan and Harry have exploited with remarkable consistency. Queen Elizabeth II understood that silence in the face of a blurred line is not neutrality. It is slow erosion. She spent her entire reign refusing to allow that erosion to begin. The current situation is proof of what happens when her warning is set aside. The Australia tour is over. The images have been archived. The statements have been made. But the record is permanent, and the record is damning. Not because of any single moment or any single accusation, but because of the cumulative, undeniable pattern of choices made by two people who understood the rules, agreed to the rules, and then quietly built an empire on the assumption that the rules would never be enforced. They chose this. Every single step of it. If you've been watching this story unfold, and you knew from the beginning how it would end, you belong here. Palace Leaks covers what the mainstream press is too polite to say plainly. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because this story is far from over, and every new chapter proves the point.